Ladies and gentlemen, I'm on my way to a course with a multicultural audience who are to be sent abroad for a special assignment. I have to make them aware of cultural differences and how these differences affect the process of management and doing business. Like you, the audience has had a professional and latest education on management principles and concepts. It is my task to show them that they lose effectiveness when you cross cultural borders. I'm very pleased that you join me in this seminar. However, do not think that in an hour we can show you cultural differences and how other cultures behave. What we can do is show you how you are affected by your own culture. The French, the German, and even the Japanese part in you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You may wonder why this course on culture has been included in your initial training package. Well, culture is like water to a fish. A fish only discovers what water is like when it is no longer in it. Culture sustains us. We live and breathe through it. I became interested in this subject because my father is Dutch and my mother is French. My father and mother have never genuinely understood each other, which perhaps explains why they're still happily together. If something works in one culture, there is little chance that it will work in another. No Dutch management technique my father tried to use ever worked effectively in my French family.
Don't you think that internationalism can create or at least lead to common worldwide markets and cultures? It seems that companies such as McDonald's and Coca-Cola lead to common tastes, cultures, and markets throughout the whole world.
Good point. There are indeed many products and services becoming common to world markets. What is important, however, is not that they are found all over the world, but what they mean in each culture. It's true that one of the successes of a McDonald's is that it is McDonald's, and everywhere it's the same. However, if you have a Big Mac in Moscow, it means you are part of the privileged elite. How else could you get a McDonald's hamburger? In New York, on the other hand, it's a fast meal for a fast buck. What appears to be the same everywhere is rarely actually the same. McDonald's is an explicit expression of the US culture in which it was created. But when it is set down in another culture, the underlying assumptions of the culture in which it is placed will give it a new meaning, a meaning that is often puzzling to the culture that invented it. Another example is the Walkman. Take a look at this. The chairman of Sony, Mr. Morita, looked for a way of listening to classical music on his way to work without bothering any fellow commuters. The Walkman was a way of not imposing on the outside world, but of being in harmony with it. For Westerners, in contrast, the device is a means to listen to music without being disturbed by other people. The fact that we can all listen to Walkmans and eat hamburgers tells us that there are some novel products that can be sold universally. But it doesn't tell us what eating hamburgers or listening to Walkmans means in different cultures. The same thing may be interpreted entirely different. And interpretation is the key, since life is all about interpretation. In order to focus on what culture is, let me ask you what you associate with the word.
Food.
You're definitely not English.
Dress.
Climate.
Architecture.
Public emotion.
Language.
Fair enough. Culture comes in layers, like an onion. To understand it, one has to unpeel it layer by layer. You have identified the products of culture, the explicit and observable things, in other words, the outer layer. Examples of explicit culture in business are the organogram, the staff appraisal sheet, or the job evaluation system. These are expressions of deeper values and norms in a company. They are deeper within the onion and are more difficult to identify. To understand the meaning of the organogram or the appraisal and job evaluation systems, we need to descend to the values and norms of the people using them and to the basic assumptions on which they are rested. Let's take a closer look at what values and norms actually are. A norm is a group's definition of right and wrong. These rules can guide behavior or even thoughts and feelings. When I enter this room and see the males wearing ties, I will ask myself, should I wear one? This should question refers to a norm. If norms are the definitions of right and wrong and the rules of behavior, values refer to the definitions of good and bad. These are more internal, closer to the heart, if you like. The question now becomes, do I like wearing a tie? Values are a little less controllable by society. In fact, societies may enforce norms about right and wrong that are not consistent with the people's value concerning good and bad. If norms are consistent with values, you have a culture in harmony, a culture which is happy with itself. If you have a strain between norms and values, with norms being formally expressed in law, you have a source of energy for change. If the strain goes on for too long, it will burst, often in revolution. Eastern Europe is a good example. The norms of communism were layered over many sets of conflicting values for a long time and were not able to change the values. And now, enormous upheaval is the result. We have to be careful not to talk about the norms and the values of the Brits and the French. Norms and values come in normal curves. Here you see the distribution of norms and values in Japan and the USA. They are quite different, but at the same time there is an overlap. The overlap is even bigger in comparison between France and the UK. When the French talk about the Brits, they are likely to exaggerate.
The Brits are class-conscious gentlemen and classical phlegmatics.
And the Brits will talk about the French in an equally extreme way and deny the existence of any overlap.
The French are passionate lovers and excited hypocrites.
This is called stereotyping, which makes the distance between France and the UK seem larger than it is in reality. There is nothing wrong with stereotyping as long as you know you're doing it. During this lecture, we know we will be doing it from time to time for the sake of clarity.
Can I just ask why norms and values have developed differently across the world?
We have to go back to the root of the word culture for that purpose. The literal meaning of cultivate is to act upon nature. If we go back into history, we see that people had to organize themselves to cope with the problems nature was giving them. This acting upon nature, this continuous problem-solving for survival, is the source of culture. The uniqueness of a culture's norms and values results both from the peculiar characteristics of the natural environment in which the group struggled and its own ambitions. Culture is a problem-solving process. But as soon as a solution is found, a new environment comes into being which presents another set of problems. For example, industrial culture's need for energy leads to nuclear power as a solution, which entails new problems such as nuclear waste and the proliferation of knowledge and materials which can be used for warfare. So industrial culture must struggle for another set of solutions. It is from the confrontation with repetitive problems that culture gets its mysterious, unconscious qualities. We can illustrate this with a short experiment. Would you please hold your breath for 3 minutes, starting now? For the first time, we realize that the human body lacks oxygen every 10 seconds. By the way, you can stop now. Now that's a real survival problem. But we have developed a regular system for solving it. It's called breathing. How often do we think about that? Usually we take it for granted. Every problem that comes to us regularly and for which we develop a regular solution slips out of consciousness, both the problem and its solution. Do you think every step we take reminds us of the laws of gravity? We take gravity for granted. And we can go on and on. These things we take for granted are called basic assumptions. Basic assumptions are so unconscious that we need help in recalling them. They are accumulations of solutions to survival problems which have become habitual and are passed down from generation to generation. Our set of basic assumptions defines the meaning we assign to the things around us. So culture is a shared system of meaning which functions as a process leading to automatic solutions to frequently recurring problems. This part of culture is unconscious or subconscious. But we have to bear in mind that the basic assumptions of our own culture are not shared around the world. Other groups experience different problems due to the peculiarities of the environment in which their survival struggle took place. Their adaptation processes have taken different paths, and now their solutions have become just as unconscious as ours. Not until we bump into each other do we realize how unique the norms and values of our own culture actually are. Because these assumptions are unconscious, the meeting between culture creates confusion. In order to come to grips with these subtle, unconscious differences, we must return to the source of culture and the basic problems of humanity. There are at least 3 such problems. These universally shared problems are our relationships with other people, our relationship with time, and our relationship with nature. From the different solutions various cultures have chosen to these 3 universal problems, we can further identify 7 fundamental dimensions of culture. Let's start with the first universal problem, relationships with other people. Under this heading we will distinguish 5 orientations. These orientations define our way of approaching dilemmas in the human arena. Part of the purpose of culture is to provide answers and guide behavior in situations that come to us as dilemmas. Let's kick off with the first dimension, universalism versus particularism. Imagine 2 friends in a car. The driver hits a pedestrian. His friend knows that he was going at least 35 miles per hour in an area where the maximum allowed speed is 20 miles per hour. There are no witnesses. The driver's lawyer says that if his friend testifies under oath that he was only going 20 miles per hour, it may save him from serious consequences. Let's see what happens.
My friend was driving too fast, Your Honor.
My friend was only driving 20 miles per hour.
Many Germans and most Northern Europeans and North Americans would think their friend has no right whatsoever to expect them to testify in his favor. They are universalist in that they focus more on rules than on relationships. For them, there is only one truth or reality, namely that agreed to by the culture in which we live. Universalism tends to imply equality in the sense that all persons falling under the rule should be treated the same. Such rule-based conduct will resist exceptions that might weaken that rule. There is a fear that once you start to make exceptions for illegal conduct, the system will collapse. Conversely, in Korea or Venezuela, 2/3 of the respondents say they would lie to the police to protect their friend. They are particularistic in their judgments and thus focus on personal respect. For them, there are several perspectives on reality relative to each participant. This person is not a citizen, but my friend, brother, husband, child, or person of unique importance to me, with special claims on my love or my hatred. I must therefore sustain or protect this person, no matter what the rules say.
But to answer the question whether I would testify in favor of my friend, I would need to know what happened to the pedestrian.
The pedestrian was killed in the accident.
Alors là, my friend has all the right to expect me to help him. En effet, he needs my help now more than ever. After all, in France, a friend is more important than a pedestrian.
As you see, particularistic cultures like the French or Latin cultures in general are even more likely to support their friend as the pedestrian's injuries increase. They seem to reason, my friend needs my help more than ever now that he is in serious trouble with the law. What do you think of your colleague's reaction?
Well, I wouldn't trust a particularist because they will always help their friends.
Eh bien, I would not trust a universalist because they would not even help their friends.
Indeed, business people from both societies will tend to think each other corrupt. This dimension seriously affects business in the international scene. Let us consider some of the areas where this dilemma shows up. The contract. Legal contracts are readily drawn up in universalistic cultures. A trustworthy person is the one who honors his word or contract. A deal is a deal. There is a very high correlation between universalism and the number of lawyers. The US is a case in point. The more universalistic the society, the higher the need for an institution to protect the universal truth. Legal contracts are readily modified in particularistic cultures. If you introduce contracts with strict requirements and penalty clauses, the implied message is that one party would cheat on the other if not legally restrained from doing so. Moreover, relationships have a flexibility and durability which contracts often lack. A trustworthy person is therefore the one who honors changing circumstances. A second example of the dilemma of universalism versus particularism is the role of the head office. In those Western countries which are high in universalism, the head office tends to hold the keys to global marketing, global production, and global human resource management. My own experience, though, is that within more particularistic cultures, the writ of the head office fails to shape local ways of operating. Different groups develop their own local standards, which become the basis of their solidarity and resistance to centralized edicts. What frequently occurs is that foreign-based subsidiaries will pretend to comply with head office directives, which leads to a kind of ritualistic corporate rain dance. They will go through the motions of enacting the universal dance, so long as they are under scrutiny, but they do not believe that rain will result. As soon as the attention of head office is diverted to other matters, normal life proceeds. If you would like to read more about the dimension of universalism versus particularism, I have enumerated the characteristics of both extremes, as well as a series of tips for doing business with or managing either extreme, in the booklet that accompanies this lecture. If you would like to measure your own score on this dimension and receive advice in a personalized way, then I refer you to the software that is available with this program. Let's continue here by focusing on how the international manager can attempt to reconcile both extremes. The international manager is very often caught in the dilemma of the universal or global truth and a particular or local circumstance. Awareness of the differences is not enough. On the one hand, we need to listen to the universalities of headquarters and apply rules and procedures to ensure equity and consistency. But since we do not want to degenerate into rigidity and bureaucracy, we must, on the other hand, encourage flexibility by adapting to local situations. But since we neither want to drown in chaos or lose our sense of central direction, we must now and then rely on these rules and procedures that ensure stability. Intuitively, the international manager goes through this cycle in which the middle is held by his talents to strike a balance between central guidelines and local adaptation. Let me illustrate this with an example. In a British pharmaceutical firm that internationalized its research efforts, the Brits called the Italian researchers untrustworthy. They ignored deadlines, were overly flexible in their approach, and ignored all rules from the British headquarters. The Italians said it was impossible to work with the Brits because their obsession with rules killed all creativity necessary in research. Understanding the differences between the universalist Brits and the particularist Italians is not enough. We need to reconcile the pathological extremes of both ends of the continuum, and an effective cross-cultural team does that. You need the Italians for avoiding too much British bureaucracy, and you need the Brits to prevent the Italians from drowning in chaos. Let's now move on to the second dimension in our relationship with people. Collectivism versus individualism, the conflict between what each of us wants as an individual and the interest of the group we belong to. Individuals are either more self or more collectivity oriented, though one must be careful about which collectivity a particular culture identifies with. France scores very high on collectivism. Surprising. It shows the relativity of the concept. We all need to define first what the actual reference group is. For the French, it is the family and France. On that level, they are individualistic, only as a group. Examples are Club Med and National Vacation in August. For each single society, we have to define the group with which individuals have the closest identification. They may identify with their trade union, their family, their company, their religion, their profession, their nation or state. The Japanese tend to identify with the company. The Eastern Bloc used to with the Communist Party, and Ireland with the Roman Catholic Church. Let's now take a look at some important issues raised by these differences in international business. The first important area is representation and status. It has been observed that collectivist cultures prefer plural representation. For example, Singaporeans, Nigerians, the Japanese and the French seek negotiation groups which are microcosms of the interests of their entire national subsidiaries. Rarely does one see a single Japanese going to an important negotiation. Unaccompanied persons in collectivist cultures are assumed to lack status. If there is no one to take notes for you or help carry your bags, you cannot be very important. It is quite opposite to the American dream of the Lone Ranger. The lesser people you take, the stronger they need to be. If you arrive unaccompanied in Thailand, for example, they may seriously underestimate your status and power at home. The Lone Ranger cannot have any respect, because how can you be alone and at the same time be important? Conversely, it is no coincidence that in English the only pronoun written with a capital letter is I. The more frequent use of the I form in individualistic cultures reflects that people ideally achieve alone and assume personal responsibility. Collectivistic cultures, on the other hand, will rely on a more frequent use of the we form, which explains that people ideally achieve in groups which assume joint responsibility. Another area in which these orientations strikingly differ is decision-making. The decision-making process in individualistic cultures is usually very short. Decisions are made on the spot by lonely representatives in a few fateful seconds, or there is a vote to have all noses pointing in the same direction. While this may make for quicker deliberations, it will often be followed by significant delays due to implementation problems. The disparity between decision and implementation in individualistic societies is often due to the fact that the organization has conspired behind the back of the decision maker. This is the setback of the compromise. Collectivist decision-making typically takes much longer, and collective people will frequently ask for a timeout in negotiations so they can go through the famous loop necessary for reaching consensus. They strongly disapprove of voting. Decisions are referred back to the organization. If the Home Office is not consulted first, an initial or individual yes can easily become a no later. But since those consulted will usually have to implement the consensus, the implementation phase typically proceeds smoothly and easily. A final example of the difference between individualism and collectivism regards the role of translators. In Anglo-Saxon negotiations, the translator is supposed to be functional, like a black box through which words in one language enter and words in another language exit. The translator in more collectivist cultures will usually serve the national group, engaging them in lengthy asides and attempting to mediate misunderstandings arising from culture as well as language. On my trip to Japan, it was quite irritating that my no answer was translated in 3 sentences. I got worried when I clearly heard my Japanese business counterpart say ha. I knew it meant yes. The translator again gave me 3 sentences and glued some conditions to the ha. I only realized later that in Japan a translator is literally an interpreter with a much more relational function, and most probably the top negotiator in the collectivity-oriented team. Now let's examine what we can do with this knowledge in international business. We can increase our international effectiveness if we try to see the issue of individual versus group as essentially circular, with 2 starting points. The individualist culture sees the individual as the end and improvements to collective arrangements as the means to achieve it. The collectivist culture sees the group as its end and improvements to individual capacities as a means to that end. Yet, if the relationship is truly circular, the decision to label one element as an end and another as a means is arbitrary. By definition, circles never end. Every end is also a means to another goal. The effective international manager is convinced that individualism finds its fulfillment in service to the group, while group goals are of demonstrable value to individuals only if those individuals are consulted and participate in the process of developing them. The reconciliation is not easy but possible. Again, a list of recognizable differences and tips for doing business with or managing both extremes is given in the booklet. Let's now move on to the 3rd dimension in our relationship with other people: neutral versus affective. In human relations, both reason and emotion play a role. Which of these dominates will depend upon whether we are emotionally neutral in our approach or whether we are affective. Take a look at this meeting where a team of Dutch engineers sits together with an Italian team who has submitted a proposal for a new bridge.
We have studied your proposals carefully, and the bridge looks great, but there are still a couple of minor problems. We don't think the bridge will hold longer than 2 months, so we need to change some of the crazy points in your design.
We need time out.
Wat gebeurt er nou?
Weet ik veel. Er is weer zo'n typisch Italiaanse reactie. Voor ze kunnen uitleggen wat er aan de hand is, zijn ze weg.
As you can see, the amount of visible emoting is a major difference between cultures. We will return to this happening shortly, because you can tell from the reaction of the Italians that there is a problem. May I first invite you to watch this?
Επιδιώξεων ξένων έξω βαλκανικών δυνάμεων και κοινοτικών δυνάμεων, δεν θέλω να τις κατονομάσω, έχουν γίνει ολοφάνερες.
What do you think of that?
Empty vessels make the most noise.
At least he means what he says.
Only a dead fish has an open mouth.
As you see, the Japanese and the English, together with Northern Europeans, disapprove of waving hands and other gestures. The amount of emotions we show is often the result of convention. The role of humor is also quite different amongst neutral and affective people. Neutral people, like the British, will frequently use humor to diffuse the situation. They invented the understatement for this. If an English person would speak of being underwhelmed by my presentation, or regarding it with modified rapture, it is a way of controlling emotional expression, while at the same time triggering emotional release in the form of laughter. The more effective French and Americans would rather use the overstatement. Although Western society has mainly a verbal culture in that we become uneasy once we stop talking, we do have very different styles of discussion.
We want the Queen on the coin, and that's it. It's running to your nationality in your own country.
Yeah, but doesn't it make...
For the Anglo-Saxons, when A stops, B starts.
Easy to
it is not polite to interrupt.
Problems with changing money and things like that.
You can get round that.
The even more verbal Latins integrate slightly more than this. B will frequently interrupt A and vice versa, to show how interested they are in what the other is saying. There is also the possibility of not saying anything when A stops. This silent communication in Oriental languages frightens the Westerner. The moment of silence is interpreted as a failure to communicate. But this is a misunderstanding. Let us reverse the roles. How can the Westerner communicate clearly if the other person is not given time to finish his sentence or to digest what the other has been saying? It is a sign of respect for the other person if you take time to process the information without talking yourself. Another cross-cultural problem arises from tone of voice. A British manager posted to Nigeria found that it was very effective to raise his voice for important issues. His Nigerian subordinates saw this unexpected explosion by a normally self-controlled manager as a sign of extra concern. After success in Nigeria, he was posted to Malaysia. Shouting there was a sign of loss of face. His colleagues did not take him seriously and he was transferred. From these examples, it is quite clear that affective and neutral cultures have problems in doing business with each other. When such cultures meet, the first point is to recognize the differences and to refrain from making any judgments based on emotions or the lack of them. And never confuse the level of expressing emotions with the level of professionalism. So how can we balance out the extreme differences between affective and neutral cultures? Again, the effective international manager makes this reconciliation almost intuitively through the following reasoning. We must control the expression of our emotions so that we can consider issues objectively. But we should not be inhibited from expressing ourselves. So we must be able to express whatever we think openly. But we need to ensure that expressing emotions does not hinder us in achieving our objectives. So we must control the expressions of our emotions. In short, he or she controls his or her emotions so that he or she also expresses when in control. Again, I refer you to the booklet for a systematic overview of the differences, and especially to the software package should you be in doubt as to your own score on this dimension. In the meantime, we have arrived at the fourth value orientation in our relationship with people. Diffuse versus specific, which has to do with the degree of involvement in a relationship. Let me introduce this fourth dimension by asking you a question. Imagine you are very tired and you have to take a flight. The stewardess tells you that you can choose your neighbor, either a Frenchman, a German, or an American. Whom would you choose?
Anyone, as long as it is not the American, because he won't stop talking.
At least we are hospitable, whereas most Europeans are definitely not.
Indeed, specificity and diffuseness relate to how we get to know other people. Specific cultures, like the Americans, have a very small intimate or private layer, which is well separated from the larger public layers. Their public layer contains things which most Europeans would regard as private. An American will, for instance, easily lend you his car or let you into his fridge. But do not try to borrow the Mercedes from a German or to enter the fridge of your Dutch friend. One reason why American personalities are so easily accessible is that being admitted in one specific public layer is not a very big commitment. You get to know the other person for limited or specific purposes only. In contrast, diffuse cultures, like most Southern Europeans and Orientals, have such a large private area that it needs protection. That is why they are less easily accessible. But once you have been admitted to the diffuse private areas, there are nearly no more secrets. Specific cultures separate work and private matters, whereas diffuse cultures tend to mix them. Consider the following question. Would you paint the house of your boss in case he asks you and you don't feel like doing it? More than 95% of the North Americans and Dutch say they would definitely not do it. Compare that figure with the small 30% of the Chinese who wouldn't do it. This reminds me of a Dutch operator I once interviewed. He said he would not even consider painting his boss's house. When I inquired why not, he answered that it was not stated in his collective labor agreement. Can you be more specific than this? Let's consider some areas where the contrast between these two cultures is very sharp. The first one has to do with criticism and losing face. To this end, we go back to our meeting between the Dutch, one of the most specific Europeans, and the diffuse Italians. When the Dutch called the Italian idea crazy, the Italians heard themselves being called crazy. What the Dutch consider to be public, that is to say the idea at stake, is a private matter to the Italians. Their ideas are not to be separated from themselves. The danger zone is thus constituted by issues which specific cultures regard as public, but which diffuse cultures consider to be private. To call their idea crazy is to call them crazy. Specific cultures, with their small privacy areas, have considerable freedom for direct speech. If Americans get criticized during a presentation, it is likely that they will try to defend their idea without feeling insulted personally. This explains why brainstorming works so well in specific cultures. Americans put their brain easily on the table. If the idea is okay, even the better. If the brain is chomped into pieces, no problem, next brain. In diffuse cultures, where egos are big, people tend not to put their brain on the table. It is impossible for them not to take the criticism which follows a brainstorm personally. Listen to the following corporate case where criticism during a performance evaluation by a Western superior led to his murder. A Dutch physician evaluated his Chinese subordinate in a frank discussion about his shortcomings. In his view, they could easily be remedied by the company's training courses. Yet, to the Chinese doctor, who had worked closely with him and who regarded him as a father figure, the criticism was a savage indictment, a total rejection, a betrayal of mutual confidence. The next morning, he knifed his critic to death. It is easy to imagine the Dutch ghost protesting that he had never said his Chinese colleague wasn't a great fellow. It was only his medicine he was worried about. Another important area where the contrast pops up is timing a business trip. Imagine you have an interest for your product or service in Argentina and that you have come close to a deal. Now you need to fly over to finalize things. How would you proceed?
I would make a well-thought-out presentation which would clearly demonstrate the superiority of my product. I would be careful not to waste their time and stick to a strict business agenda.
I would first of all outline the history of our company to them.
I would take a week to get to know my future customer. I would not do business with people as long as I don't get to know them better.
Your reasoning matches the one most Argentinians would follow. The upfront investment in building relationships in South America is as important, if not more so, than the actual deal.
Yes, but isn't that a horrendous waste of time?
Both approaches claim to save time. In the diffuse approach, You do not get trapped in a relationship with a dishonest partner because you detect any unsavory aspects early on. In the specific approach, you don't waste time whining and dining a person who is not fully committed to the specifics of the deal. As an American, you select one element of your personality for your counterparts from the rest. But more diffuse nations will refuse to do business in a mental subdivision called work, which is kept apart from the rest of life. To them, everything is connected to everything. They may wish to know where you went to school, what you think of politics, art, literature and music. This is not a waste of time because such preferences reveal character and form friendships. They also make deception nearly impossible. Specific cultures are very direct, get straight to the point, to the objective aspects of the business deal. They are very purposive in relating. Doing business with people more diffuse than yourself will therefore look very time-consuming because they are extremely indirect, circuitous, and known for their seemingly aimless forms of relating. This brings us to a third area in which the contrast is striking, namely internal communication. Specific cultures are very precise, blunt, definite and transparent. They will start with the executive summary and make bullet statements. Do not beat around the bush, please. More diffuse personalities are evasive, tactful, ambiguous, and even opaque. Their communication is very high in context. You start with Aristotle on page 1 to explain inflation in Ireland on page 26, if you're lucky. This is the sense you get when you compare the Wall Street Journal with its many bullet statements with the more philosophical and circuitous Le Monde, the French elitist newspaper. A British manager once told me that he got furious when introducing a new bonus scheme. To introduce the system into the Netherlands, he wrote a fax to his Dutch counterpart in the following style. We suggest to introduce a new bonus system of the following nature. After 3 months, he realized that the Dutch hadn't been very active in getting the system going. Not to say they didn't do anything. He got quite alarmed, British understatement for enormously furious, when he heard why. Obviously, we didn't start introducing the scheme because it was just a suggestion and we didn't like it. Another difference regards the use of titles. When I graduated in the United States, I was introduced during the reception following the graduation as Dr. Trompenaars. However, the next day at a party at the house of my tutor professor, I was introduced as von Trompenaars. It shows that a title is a specific label for a specific person in a specific job at a specific time. Once that changes, your title changes too. Compare that to the German Herr Doctor. You are not only Herr Doctor at the university, but Herr Doctor at the butcher. And even if you come home, Frau Doctor says, Guten Abend, Herr Doctor. Herr Doctor replies, Guten Abend, Frau Doctor. Where are the little doctors? A title in Germany is diffusely integrated with your personality. You do not have a title, you are a title. A fifth difference between specific and diffuse cultures is their mobility and turnover of staff. The specific relationship is the result of high mobility and results in high mobility. I have observed full-time expatriates who developed a specific type of personality. How can you remain mobile if you involve your privacy in a relationship? Impossible. Diffuse relationships result in low mobility. The only way to achieve mobility here is to move the whole family, so the relationships keep on being respected. The British have solved it with the British Club around the world. Going local was one of the greatest sins. Diffuse cultures also tend to have less turnover of staff because of the loyalty and the multiplicity of human bonds. They tend not to headhunt or lure away people from other companies with high, specific salaries. These examples illustrate that personal involvement, rating from specific to diffuse, is perhaps the area in which balance is most crucial from both a personal and a corporate point of view. The specific extreme, to keep business separated from the rest of life, might lead to superficiality. So we must recognize that the integration of different aspects of one's personality can deepen the relationship. Yet we need to retain perspective in order not to compromise privacy and business. The effective international manager must avoid collision between the two at all costs and realize that business is business, but that stable and deep relationships mean strong affiliations. This dimension is undoubtedly one of the more important explanations of cultural differences. Again, I invite you to take a closer look at the systematic enumeration of these differences in the booklet, and to measure your own score on this dimension in the software program. We have thus arrived at the fifth dimension in our relationship with other people, achievement versus ascription, which has to do with the meaning we assign to other people. If I had walked into this room saying, "Hello, I'm Frans Trompenaars, I'm 39 and father of 3 daughters, Lisa, Faye and Gaia. I have 2 sisters and a brother. I have a degree of the Free University of Amsterdam and obtained a PhD from Wharton, the University of Pennsylvania." What would you have thought?
Who cares? You never mentioned what you actually do here.
Exactly. This dimension of achievement versus ascription explains how we assign status to other people. All societies give certain of their members higher status than others. While some societies accord status to people on the basis of their achievements, others ascribe it to them by virtue of age, class, gender, education, and the like. The first kind of status is called achieved status, and the second ascribed status. While achieved status refers to doing, ascribed status refers to being. My imaginative intro was based on who I am, rather than on what I do. But in the American dream, status is built on what you do. It doesn't matter who you were or are. The American dream is the nightmare for the French. You start from scratch, and on the basis of what you do, you become a millionaire. It is nouveau riche for the French. The French would rather be ancien pauvre than nouveau riche. Let's examine some of the areas in international business where this dimension plays an important role. The first is negotiating. It can be extremely irritating to managers of achieving cultures when an ascriptive team of negotiators has some éminence grise in the background to whom they have to submit any proposals or changes. It isn't even clear what this person does. He, usually male, will not say what he wants, but simply expects deference from everybody. It is, of course, equally upsetting for ascriptive cultures when the achieving team wheels on aggressive young men and women who spout knowledge as if it were a kind of ammunition to which the team opposite is expected to surrender. To them, it is like having to play with a toddler and a toy gun. A lot of noise coming from someone who is of no known authority or status. Sending whiz kids to deal with ascriptive people who are 10 to 20 years their senior often insults the ascriptive culture. The reaction may be, do these people think that they have reached our level of experience in half the time? That a 30-year-old American is good enough to negotiate with a 50-year-old Greek or Italian? Closely linked is the actual meaning of status in both orientations. In ascriptive cultures, it is important to tie in your status with your organization. Indeed, your achievement as an individual will be discounted compared to the status your organization ascribes to you. It is therefore important to say not just that you are a manager, but what you are a manager in charge of: marketing, finance, human resources, or sales. Many a deal has been lost in Latin or Oriental cultures because the representative was not seen to have high status back home. Ascriptive cultures must be assured that your organization has great respect for you and that you are at or near the top. In ascriptive societies, the role of titles is quite different from the use of it in achievement-oriented cultures. In the latter cultures, you tend to ask first what you studied, and afterwards you might be asked where. In ascribed societies, they first ask where you studied. Only in case it was a lousy university for saving your face, they will ask what you studied. If it is Oxbridge or the École Polytechnique, the second question is often forgotten. Another area where this dimension causes a lot of misunderstanding is staff appraisal. A Swedish manager was managing a project in Pakistan. A vacancy had to be filled, and after careful assessment, he chose one of the 2 most promising Pakistani employees. Both candidates were highly educated, with PhDs in mechanical engineering, and both were authorities in their field. Yet Mr. Khan was selected on the basis of some recent achievements. Mr. Saran, the candidate not chosen, was very upset by the turn of events. He went to his Swedish boss for an explanation. His boss tried to make him understand that only one of the 2 could be chosen for there was only one vacancy. He made no progress. Eventually, he learned that Mr. Saran received his PhD 2 years before Mr. Khan from the same American university. Saran was expected to have more status than his colleague simply because of this. His family would never understand. What was this Western way of treating ascribed status so lightly? Shouldn't more than just the achievements of the past month be considered?
I know a young female marketing manager who worked for an American company in England. She was so successful that she was named the most promising female manager. This vote of confidence influenced her to accept an offer as director of marketing to her company's subsidiary in Ankara, Turkey. Working as hard as she could over the first few months, she found her authority gradually slipping away. The most experienced Turk, Hassan, who was 30 years her senior, informally but consciously took over, getting things done where her own efforts failed, although his marketing knowledge was only a fraction of her own. She had to watch him exercise influence, which often led to unsatisfactory results. She learned that the head office was complicit in this, communicating more and more through Hassan, not her. I suppose her story can also be explained by the fact that Turkish culture is much more ascription-oriented than achievement-oriented.
Indeed, cultural preferences often have the force of law. Refusal to send young women managers to Turkey because they are young and female may be illegal, yet to send them is to confront them with difficulties which they will not be able to surmount through no fault of their own. A better tactic may be to make someone young or female an assistant or advisor to native managers. They will make up for any deficits in knowledge of these native managers while using local seniority to get things done. Such a posting could be paid in the same way as being chief in an achievement-oriented culture. You cannot replace Turkish with American cultural norms if you seek to be effective in Turkey. This will not be effective in the long run, and in the short run, it can be very expensive. But as I said, I do believe in the reconciliation of the two orientations. Those who are achievement-oriented are convinced that we need to appreciate and reward what people do and achieve on the basis of their skills and knowledge. But they will agree that valuing the last performance only leads to instability. Hence, they should try to understand the conviction of ascription-oriented cultures who respect who people are on the basis of their experience and past record. But ascription-oriented cultures should also understand that we cannot be hindered in our achievements by not challenging the status quo, and that we should therefore reward people on the basis of what they do as well. The middle the international manager must try to hold is the respect for what people are, so that we can take better advantage of what they do. We have now discussed 5 aspects of culture that affect the relationships among people. But relationships among people is just the first universally shared problem to which different cultures have devised different solutions. Let us now discuss the last 2 dimensions of culture and start with our relationship to time. To coordinate our business activities, we require some kind of shared expectations about time. The time agreed for a meeting may be approximate or precise. The time allocated to complete a task may be vitally important or merely a guide. The notion of time also expresses the importance cultures give to the past, present, and future. If you ask people to draw the importance of the past, present, and future by means of 3 circles, you get interesting differences across cultures. Americans have relatively big presents and futures, while their small past seems to be detached. The Japanese have similar sizes, but they are more integrated. By asking this question, we look at 2 aspects. The first is size, which is the more easy to interpret. It indicates the importance of the dimension. Be careful, however, because the length of time is not taken into consideration in these circles. The Japanese and the Americans may have similar sizes for past, present, and future, but this does not mean that they have the same opinions of what short and long terms actually mean. When the Japanese were negotiating to take over Yosemite National Park in California, they submitted a 250-year business plan. The initial American reaction was, gee, that is 1,000 quarterly reports. The second aspect the circles illustrate is the relationship between the 3 time dimensions. One is either sequential, so there is no or little overlap of circles, or one is synchronic and the circles are integrated. If our view of time is sequential or monochronic, we see time as a series of passing events. If our view of time is synchronic or polychronic, with past, present and future all interrelated, ideas about the future and memories of the past both shape present action. Everything has its time and place as far as the sequential thinker is concerned. Any change in this sequence will make the sequential person more uncertain. Try jumping a queue in Great Britain. You will find that orderly sequence has very stern defenders. Everyone must wait his turn. First come, first serve. It is part of good form. In a butcher shop in Italy, I saw the butcher unwrap salami at the request of one customer and then shout, "Who else for salami?" This method serves more people in less time. At my local butcher shop in Amsterdam, the butcher calls a number, unwraps, cuts and rewraps each item and then calls the next number. Once I suggested, "While you have the salami out, cut a pound for me too." Customers and staff went into shock. The system may be very ineffective, but they were not about to let some wise guy change it. The synchronic method, however, requires that people track various activities in parallel, rather like a juggler with 6 balls in the air. It is not easy for cultures who are not used to it. Likewise, people who do only one thing at a time can, without meaning to, insult those who are used to do several things at the same time. A South Korean manager explained his disappointment upon returning to Holland to see his boss. He was on the phone when I entered and he raised his hand slightly at me. Then he rudely continued his conversation as if I were not even in the room. Only after he finished his conversation, he got up and greeted me with an enthusiastic but insincere, "Kim, happy to see you." I just couldn't believe it. To a synchronic person, not being greeted spontaneously and immediately, even while talking on the telephone, is a slight. The whole notion of sequencing your emotions and postponing them until other matters are out of the way suggests insincerity. You show how you value someone by giving them time, even if he or she shows up unexpectedly. Sequential people tend to schedule very tightly, with thin divisions between time slots. It is rude to be even a few minutes late because the whole day's schedule is affected. Time is viewed as a commodity, and lateness deprives the other of precious minutes in a world where time is money. Synchronous cultures are less insistent upon punctuality. American time scheming strikes them as aggressive and seeking to use customers as stepping stones to personal advantage. If the relationship is genuinely to last, what is the hurry? In sequentially organized cultures, there is a heavy emphasis on deadlines because they signal the end of one link in a causal chain and the beginning of the next, and keep you on schedule. Once again, we find that differences in time orientation are not truly alternatives, but are capable of being used in conjunction. Future-oriented cultures will get the present into focus by relating it to a desired future. But visions need to be realistic. So cultures who are past or present-oriented will build the present of their business upon the learning of the past. But it is quite clear that we should not simply repeat the past, but relate the present to a desired future. The wise cross-cultural manager will hold the middle by developing clear plans which lead from current competencies to a new vision. In the booklet, there is an entire chapter on the different meanings various cultures assign to time. I have completed these meanings with tips for managing or doing business with cultures of another time orientation than your own. If you would like to put your own time judgment to the test, I warmly invite you to fill out the questionnaire in the software package. Let's now turn to the last dimension of culture, our relationship with nature. This dimension concerns the role people assign to their natural environment. Societies which conduct business have developed between two major attitudes towards nature. The first of these orientations is inner-directed. People here believe that they can and should control nature by imposing their will upon it. For this kind of culture, the organization is like a machine that obeys the will of its operators. The second orientation is outer-directed and believes that man is part of nature and must go along with its laws and forces. This kind of culture tends to see an organization as a product of nature, owing its developments to the nutrients in its environment and to a favorable ecological balance. The issue of inner versus outer directedness becomes very interesting when compared with the results of the next pair of statements.
What happens to me is my own doing.
Sometimes I feel that I don't have enough control over the direction my life is taking.
On this basis, a number of countries appear almost completely internalized. In the USA, for example, 77% of managers believe they control their own destinies, as do 61% of the West Germans. The other extreme is countries like Japan and Venezuela, where only 38% and 35% believe to have control over the environment. In this context, remember that death is an option for the Americans, like having a pure face. If it is not okay, you need plastic surgery. For the British, who are relatively more externally oriented, God didn't make mistakes in the first place. Language ability is highly related to locus of control. Inner-directed cultures control the environment and expect the environment to adapt to their language. Americans or Brits are unlikely to speak Japanese, for instance. But the Japanese, who are outer-directed and thus feel that they should adapt, will try hard to speak other languages. Our Western contention that Asians steal our ideas is shaped by our notions about what comes from inside of us and is therefore ours. Asians regard Western technologies as part of the environment, like fruit on a tree, which wise people pick and incorporate into themselves. To take something from the external environment and then refine or improve it is not copying, but celebrating that environment. The difference between inner and outer directedness is well shown in the attitude of sportsmen. An American wrestler will say, "I do not care who my opponent is. I'm strong enough to beat anybody." The focus here is internal. With my increased strength, I will beat the other. Compare this to the martial arts of the Oriental cultures. Strength is important too here, but for a different reason. The strongest is the one who takes most energy of his opponent to his own advantage. We should not, however, make the error of assuming that inner direction and outer direction are exclusive options. All cultures necessarily take some notice of what is inside or outside. To fail to do so would lead inner-directed cultures into a headlong rush to disaster, while outer-directed cultures would try to please everyone and dissipate their energies by over-compliance. The inner-directed manager is never happier than having won over other people to his or her own way of thinking. They hold that we should focus on things we are good at and persuade our environment to accept them. This is known as technology push. But they also know that there needs to be a market for what we produce and that we need to respond to the environment and to the needs of the customer. This is known as market pull. Still, we must not just want to be at the mercy of the forces around us, but lead them, which again closes the circle in which the middle is held by the international manager's capacity to ride the waves of opportunities and by taking advantage of existing forces and not contradict them. The most competitive international companies are those who can combine the strength of both push and pull factors. Now that we have discussed the 7 fundamental aspects of culture, it may be more obvious to you why we have to be careful in claiming universal applicability of most management and business techniques. Let me conclude with a case that reflects the cultural dilemma clearly. A US-based company decided to introduce a pay-for-performance scheme for their salespeople. The best salespeople got the opportunity to double their salaries. It was successful enough to introduce a similar system in Europe. Although there were more introduction problems, the system became nearly as successful as in the US. It was then decided to expand the system to the Middle East. After an initial success of 3 months, sales dropped to an unprecedented level in Iran. How come, you think?
The Iranians needed money too. That's why it worked well the first 3 months.
Yes, but why did it collapse afterwards?
Perhaps the Iranians didn't yet have the experience of what could go wrong. After the experience in the first quarter, they might have realized their culture protested this universal system in which sales are the objective criterion for the larger income part. This threatens the particular obligation of a boss towards his subordinates.
Very good.
One individual is playing against another. This internal competition might threaten the collective efforts of the group. Furthermore, the quarterly basis of the system might lead to a rat race that threatens the long-term commitments to the clients.
Right. The achievement-oriented bonus could also lead to a situation in which the subordinate earns more than his boss. Such a situation is likely to be avoided in Iran. Also, the inshallah or externally controlled Iranians might say, "Thank you, Allah, for helping me to higher sales." Whereas in an internally controlled society, one is more likely to say, "Sales went up because of me or my efforts." But if sales go down, inshallah might be said after all.
Okay, it's clear that this pay-for-performance system is failing the Middle East because of culture. But what can we do about it?
I would not advise you to try to explain to the Iranians what the merits of a pay-for-performance system are. Such a centralizing approach might lead to serious corporate rain dancing. Neither would I advise to leave the introduction of the remuneration system to the local subsidiaries, as a fully fledged decentralizing approach would suggest.
I don't get the point. You say we should neither centralize nor decentralize. I thought you should consider either one or the other.
No. All I'm saying is that the only reason for centralization is decentralization. This type of thinking leads us to the roots of reconciling the cultural problem. The question is really, what do we need to centralize and what do we need to decentralize? My general answer would be, centralize the philosophy, increase its quality, and decentralize its application. The higher the quality of your philosophy, the easier the decentralization of its application.
That sounds easier said than done to me. What would this mean in the case of pay-for-performance system? This philosophy didn't work in Iran.
I don't agree. Pay for performance works everywhere, but different cultures assign different meanings to what is pay and what is performance.
But what does this mean in practice?
It means that the American company ran into trouble because the quality of its philosophy was just not high enough. If they had looked at the philosophy behind the pay-for-performance system, they might have reasoned, what we need is a system that motivates people in a certain direction, in this case, higher sales. So why not say that the budget for pay-for-performance should be a variable 50% of the salary budget, and that it should be given to the best salespeople according to a forced distribution at least once a year? This leaves the Iranians the freedom of turning it into a group bonus once a year. This principle works well across cultures. It's like a pendulum. The bottom of the pendulum swings better if the top is fixed. Centralize the philosophy, increase its quality, and then decentralize its application. Let's take a look at two cases in point that illustrate this message in two entirely different ways. The first one is Benetton. Luciano Benetton said, "We are not advertising with lifestyle approaches because our products are too dependent on fashion and culture. Therefore, we have centralized our philosophy of human diversity. This allows us to be flexible at the bottom." Benetton thus uses a wide range of human diversity applications in its ads all over the world, but the meaning people assign to these posters is again quite different from one place to the other, which is exactly what he's aiming at. Heineken, on the other hand, wants its beer to reflect the centralized message of guiding the process from stress through relaxation, being a genuine no-nonsense beer, targeted towards the high end of the market. Therefore, they decentralized their advertising activities to the local experts and ended up with totally different clips for the same beer in the UK, Greece, Italy, and so on, which all reflect the same centralized philosophy, but in a way adapted to the culture in question. So, the general principle holds that the only reason for centralization is decentralization, just like the only reason for differentiation is integration. This very presentation has hopefully shown that a central message of global quality can incorporate many local interpretations and applications. I hope this message will help you in your future assignments, and I wish you good luck. And for you, the viewer, I now invite you to work through the questionnaire in the accompanying software package. This will enable you to determine your own cultural profile based on the models I have described. As I said at the beginning of my lecture, the aim is not simply to help you understand other cultures, but to help you generate your own cultural mirror image. I hope you will be able to reflect on it at your leisure. Goodbye for now.